to pass it off to Edith.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you. I'm sorry about the problems we had with the text, but as you're here now, if you wouldn't mind, if you could share in the chat your teaching context, maybe years teaching, where you're located, maybe the indigenous people of your region, if you'd like to put that into the chat. If you're just tired and don't feel like doing that, that's fine too. I'll spare you a lengthy bio. I'm very glad to be here, and I've been teaching environmental science and the visual arts for over 30 years. I've also been creating and tending gardens for most of that time in many varied settings, ranging from schools, including public schools, independent schools, parochial schools, and museums and environmental science centers. If we could go to the second slide, I'm just going to check the chat and see if anybody was inspired to write anything. No, okay, it's a long day. What I'm sharing here will be mostly slides from a permaculture garden, that permaculture inspired garden that I was designing and caring for in southern New Hampshire with students and volunteers during the last 8 years of my active classroom teaching. And it was also it's a very beautiful project, and I hope you can see it. This lists some of the schools with whom I was associated during these years. I'd also like to mention that in addition to gardening and teaching, I taught environmental science and the visual arts. I also am an illustrator, so I've been making some visual art during these decades as well. In a recent project I did was the Indigenous harvest calendar. And Stacy, if you could just hit slide 3, that'd be great. And that was an online publication released in 2020. It has supporting materials about the Abenaki people. And while I'm understandably biased, I think it's an outstanding gardening resource. And I've listed it on a resource page that you could find in my own website. And so recently I have been uploading many of the activities that I developed to my website. It's called evolvingbeauty.org. And if you'd like, and you could follow along as I discuss the games today, right in that particular website. And at that website, under the list of special projects, the first title you'll find there are some supporting addresses, some resources that are related to the discussions we'll be having here today. So that's evolvingbeauty.org. And 5 of the activities that I've written over the years have been published in the Canadian online environmental education magazine, Green Teacher. I very much enjoyed teaching these projects, and my students seem to enjoy them as well. And most importantly, they were making good progress with their science learning, or equally importantly, they were good for learning. And with that in mind, I thought I would make these activities available for others to try. If you go to the website, evolvingbeauty.org, you'll find numerous free downloadable activity pages related to gardening and or various creatures and ecological processes that are characteristic of the temperate Northeast forest lands. You'll also find their materials and some other topics that I care about, such as organic gardening, farming and eating, Laudato Si, deep history, and the universe story of Thomas Berry. So those are up on my website. And another resource you'll find there, Stacy, if you could switch to the, yeah, thanks. You'll find a downloadable PDF of this draft for my book, which is called Circling the Sun, Racing the Wind. And this 172-page activity collection is scheduled for publication this fall by Green Writers Press of Vermont. I put a link to the book's description at Green Writers Press if you'd like to learn more about the book. And please be aware that you can access the draft version free of charge right on the website. And as I said, you might want to open it up. And so you can browse as we're talking this afternoon. And now to begin, let's just take a few minutes for centering. I certainly could use this. If we could go to the next slide. I'd like to invite everybody to pause after a no doubt long, eventful, and probably tiring day. Please give yourselves a moment to rest and breathe deeply, to enjoy the oxygen coursing into your lungs, to exhale fully. Breathe in again and harvest from the vast surrounding universe those minute star-birthed atoms of oxygen that are so essential for our little but amazing lives on this planet. Let's remember that this planet itself and ourselves are all gifts from the 13.8 billion-year-old cosmos to which we all belong. and in which we'll always participate going forward. Allow your body itself made of stardust to settle peacefully, to rest, to breathe out and breathe in. And since we're all on a particular piece of land at this particular time, let's acknowledge our gratitude to those who were here before us on this planet, human and otherwise, the little microorganisms, the plants, the animals, the fungi, etc., all our relatives with whom we share common genetics and whose concerted actions have created this beautiful world into which we were born. Let's acknowledge especially our human ancestors from all around the world whose love and struggles have brought us to this particular place in time. And I'd especially like to thank the indigenous peoples of this North American continent who related so well and harmoniously with these ecosystems for literally thousands of years, whose descendants are still among us and are us. And in my situation, I'd like to express gratitude to the Pawtucket peoples of the lower Merrimack River Valley and Atlantic shore from present-day York, Maine to Salem, Massachusetts. May our gardening and our gardening teaching continue along paths that our forebears would approve. And may we honor the first people's wisdom and caring compassion and carry it on. And now the next slide should show a school garden. And I'd like to say how grateful, let's see, oh, there it is. I'd like to say how grateful I am to be in your company today. Teaching gardening to young people is such a wonderful and rewarding endeavor. I so miss being vigorous enough to be able to teach on a daily basis. I think that gardening programs, if they're combined with good science and strong arts programs, and also with physical and vocational education, have extraordinary potential to transform in positive and life-affirming ways the enculturation of our youth. However, that can only happen if these gardening programs, our gardening programs, are not co-opted by market forces and extractive mindsets that distort so much of today's culture, even as they imperil our biosphere. But that's another topic. More to the point, I'd like to thank you for your leadership and your vital teaching and for choosing to show up today for this gathering. And since there aren't very many of us here, if you'd like, we could arrange this so you can just unmute and ask questions as they arise rather than waiting for the end. That's just fine. I can only see a couple people, so I was going to ask for a show of hands, but I don't think that will work unless you'd like to put the reactions. And if people would like to unmute. And I was also wondering whether you'd want me to focus on older children, like the fourth graders and sixth, fifth and sixth, or third graders and below. If you could put a reaction, I'll look on the gallery and try to figure that out. Well, so I'm going to go ahead and just sort of give you some pictures of our garden. And if we go to the next slide. For the next 45 minutes or so, we'll just dive into some activities. I hope some of them will be useful for your teaching, gardening concepts and skills. I really believe, let's look at the next slide, that gardens, particularly organic permaculture style ones, featuring wildlife habitat, native plants, agroforestry, they have such potential for pro-social and pro-planetary learning. And I want to show you a few slides of the kids in our garden. Let's see. Yes, thank you. This was we were frankly in an economically depressed urban area, but our 1,800 square foot main garden was a lovely place to be. We can switch to that slide. It was a sanctuary for us and our neighbors, human and otherwise, and the school gardens offered generous harvests of flowers, herbs, teas, strawberries, apples, pears, and even a modest amount of squash. And if we could switch to the next slide, you'll see the corn. We had corn, beans, and even a few blueberries. And those are just, if you want to look to the next slide, those are just some of its tangible gifts. There were so many more. They were subtle, but they were probably far more important. And then we can go to the next slide. And I'll present these activities for the most part, from the simplest for the youngest to the more complex. The actual activity book, in contrast, is organized by phenomenon and creatures. And if you look at the draft PDF, the approximate participant ages are all listed for each activity in the table of contents. And at the beginning of each activity, although not in the table of contents, you can find a listing of correlations to the next generation's science standards. Oh, it's just racing ahead on its own, isn't it, Stacy?
No.
Oh, okay. No, we don't need to be up that far yet, but that's okay. Anyway, I hope having those standards there will just save you time when you're trying to explain or document your activities to administrators and families. I am convinced that our school gardens, so we can go to the next slide now, they aren't only about human food production. They should be designed and intended as part of a multifunctional, beautiful ecosystem. Moreover, gardening can and should be an art as well as a science. And I encourage you to keep the arts front and center. And this is essential since the arts connect our students to the wellspring of their personal psychological energy, as well as to a social and even cosmic context. And I define art, I'm just going to put it right out here, that as it's whenever people do something to the best of their abilities, using their head, their hands, and their hearts to create an experience or an object, something that's of value to themselves and to other people. And if you define art that broadly, obviously gardening is an art. And so just like painting or playing a cello, building a deck can be an art. Anything that we do really well, that we care about and that is of value to others can be an art. So that's how I'm defining the arts here in our little discussion this afternoon. And if we could look at the next slide. At the same time, I hope you're weaving in to the garden experiences, into the gardening experiences as much significant science content, natural history learning as possible. What kind of science? Well, besides the basics, including weather, physics, and awareness of sun and moon patterns, I'd like to think we're also including some of the new understandings of evolution and complexity that are set forth in theories such as multi-level selection, endosymbiosis, evolutionary transitions, and we hope that your students can begin to learn about the vital functions of previously obscure creatures within the microbiota of the soil. And maybe they'll learn about communication between plants, even plants of different species, by way of volatile morning chemicals, including methyl salicylate, the wintergreen scent associated with black birch, Gaulteria procumbens, and some other species in our northeastern woodlands. This idea that our plants are actually letting each other know when they're in trouble, and plants are responding to the messages that they're getting by boosting their immune systems. It's just so amazing, but it is good, solid science, and it's just pointing to the complexity of our environment. Perhaps you'll be sharing with the children the recent discovery of the incredibly extensive and old mineral, water, and nutrient transport systems that exist between fungi and perennial plants, particularly trees, but also herbaceous plants like orchids, which have been given the humorous title of the World Wood Wide Web. It's hard to say, the Wood Wide Web. And it's actually a tremendous underground system that's so important for the survival and sustainability of forests as we know them. And here I'm referring in part to Suzanne Simard's paradigm shifting research about the ways trees, through the aid of their particular mycorrhizal fungi, care for their offspring and even other trees who are struggling. And this is a sample of the kind of exciting new science that we need to be communicating in our teaching, or we're privileged to be passing this on. Garden education can help celebrate and transmit these new scientific understandings that cooperation, mutualism is every bit as important in evolution as competition. 21st century children will need to know this. And I also hope that you're nurturing children's sense of wonder and supporting their innate quest to understand and be helpful, loving, and beloved members of our amazing Earth community, a community of interdependent and mutually supporting life forms, large and small. The arts help us to do this. On a more practical level, I hope you're equipping them with gardening, cooking, and even farming skills and attitudes and values that will allow them to grow, prepare, and preserve plenty of food. In the not too distant future, in our precarious times, home gardens could become essential as well as decorative. But that prospect needn't be something overwhelmingly gloomy. It doesn't need to necessarily imply that our lives will be bereft of joy and conviviality. And let's start with an actual activity here. If we could go to the next slide, we're going to start with something for the littlest kids. And it's just drama, and you can see some of the artwork the youngsters have made. They're in their garden, they're next to their school, and this is a little seed project, a little song that they used to do. And I hope we're going to be able to, as we look at these, not only consider how they play the games, but why the games might be useful. And I'll try to highlight some of the underlying structures of some of the activities, their relationship to the arts, values, and developmental psychology. Basically, most of the games in this collection are adaptations of traditional American games, often with European roots that were part of popular culture, not just the schools, at least through the mid-20th century. And what made these games so enjoyable for so many generations? What social messages and skills were they transmitting that we still might want to pass along today? Well, we'll start with these very simple ones that epitomize how imitation in the arts facilitate garden learning. These activities work really well with 4 to 6 year olds. And there's a little song, and I'll sing. And forgive me, I'm distressed that the tech was such a fiasco today, and so my voice is even worse than usual. But I'll do my best here. So here's a little song, and as I'm singing, think about how the children would be acting this out, because for every line, there's a little action that they would be doing. And these are all detailed in the activity draft available at my website, and also listed right there on the resources page that you can find on that website, specifically created for this workshop. I'm a little seed resting on the ground, soaking up the water, growing fat and round. Here are my roots, stretching far and wide, drinking up the water now to this spot I'm tied. Here is my stem marching towards the light. Now I'm in the fresh air where it's warm. Here are my leaves stretching to the sun. We are little green plants, our growing's just begun. Well, the key point here is that the science, ecological knowledge, is being combined with empathy and a bit of amazement in a little tune. The science terms for basic plant form and even some functions are being passed along here, but there's also a melody, some rhyming words, some active singing, and the playful art of drama. The children are sitting there on the ground, all making themselves as round as possible at the beginning, and then they're stretching up gradually. And at the end, they have their hands uplifted like they're flattened leaves, sort of aiming towards that beautiful sun. All these things help make this learning memorable, and the kids are learning through multiple sensory and emotional channels through the sturdy primate capacity for imitation too. Mimesis, acting, play, you could use any one of these words. They're all key to why this kind of little song might work. And here, let's send a thank you along to our human brain's fine mirror neuron system. This is what it looks like when arts augment science learning. We can forget the wheels on the bus. It's an okay song, but now let's try respectful, truthful, natural history rich songs that can enculturate our young. And getting back to learning from observation, this leads us to say, please make certain you're having fun when you're presenting, because your little students will quickly reflect and mirror your attitude far faster than they'll acquire the curricular content that you're earnestly trying to pass along. And what else does an activity like the Seed Song offer? Well, it offers parallel play. There's no need for any physical contact with any of the other kids. And this is important for some of the youngsters who have processing issues or delayed sensory integration. It's just everyone playing, acting out the words of the songs about the plants. And you can do this right next to the garden, and you can do it repeatedly, because that way they'll gradually remember it. And it just is something that they kind of, it becomes sort of like a backdrop to their science, to their gardening experience. The beauty of it, it needs no props, can be done outside. It's rather soothing, cheerful, and it unites the group in song, in art, even as they learn useful vocabulary and facts about our fellow beings, the green plants. And we could combine this activity with planting projects, seed collecting quests, a plants parts identification guide, or a take-home sheet on these questions. The premise of all these activities is that they're simply nourishing side dishes added to your students' usual banquet of outside discovery, field study, and classroom projects. So the next slide, we'll go to insects. Let's see. Thank you so much. And this is another little song that they act out. So I'll sing it. You guys can imagine how the children would be pretending to be this little insect egg. I'm a little insect egg hidden on a tree. My mother placed me by these leaves. There'll be a feast for me. Now I stretch and now I hatch. I'm a larva with many feet. I'm a fat, pale little worm-like thing, and don't I love to eat? I eat, I grow, I split my skin. I eat and grow some more. But now it's best for me to rest as a pupa on the forest floor. But now I've changed and again I hatch. I have wings and I can fly. Time to find a mate and lay some eggs in a new place, and so goodbye. Well, what's going on here? Basically, you're role playing this little insect's life cycle. The youngsters are using kinesthetic, emotional, auditory channels of perception and creative individual expression, embodiment to help them better remember the objective facts of an insect's life. By singing the rhyming words, using melody and rhythm, deploying muscular bodily gestures and motions, including crouching, smiling, splitting, stretching, flying, the children are able to more thoroughly absorb and retain the verbal science concepts associated with these creatures' life history. After imaginative play of this sort, metamorphosis becomes more than a mere word. And I'd like to point out that the ending to the song is significant. At this point, the students are invited to embark on some self-directed, expansive movement. They can reconnect with their friends or soar off. This creates a little space for them to fulfill intrinsic goals. It's very empowering. And again, embodying the sequence of the insect's life, seeing their friends and teachers do the same, because I act this out for the kids. They watch me. And they, I go through all the little gestures, and they, by watching the teachers do this and see their friends do this, they get a sense of the importance of the creatures. It establishes a visceral empathy. And as I said, it establishes a sense of the importance of these living beings, that we're going to take our time and actually study about them. And we need to recall that insects also include the pollinating bees, the seed dispersing ants, those little creatures who run the world, to borrow E.O. Wilson's memorable phrase. So looking more closely at the insect slide, whenever possible, I try to use the arts to convey concepts. The very simple wordless insect life cycle painting on the side is a watercolor, and it's in the style of the scientific illustrations of the 19th century. And 2x3 posters of this sort are very effective teaching tools for children whose grasp on words is still shaky. And the next slide is going to show us doing a little bit of field studies. Let's see here. There we go. Here, the students themselves are engaged in field study, and they will soon be drawing from observation some live insects. This field study is so intriguing and productive. Nature is the children's teacher here, and the results are so often astonishing, and I'm sure all of you have experienced this. If we look at the next slide, you'll see the children drawing outdoors and also inside. Back in the classroom, we can look at the next one too. I have them do a lot of drawing from references. These can be photographs, live animals in little plastic containers, boxed insect collections, or serious, respectful line illustrations that help clarify the form of the complex entities that they're trying to echo and honor in their own artwork. And we're not using cartoonish, slapdash geometric diagrams here. The emphasis is on natural history. And if you just look at the quality of the artwork that this little boy is doing here on the right, it's just astonishing. He's drawing that, there's no tracing there. He's just looking carefully at the lines. He's been studying the grasshoppers. He's just doing some beautiful work. And in the background, we'll have insect sounds from Lang Elliott's Sounds of the Insects, or other online resources playing, so that they're getting a lot of different inputs about the life and the communication skills of these little creatures, even as they're doing their drawing. You'll also notice that the gardening teaching that we're recommending in this particular webinar is not heavily focused on laboratory techniques or quantitative experiments, although the latter certainly have their place, especially as the youngsters grow older. But we're really focused on the arts here. And before we leave acting games, I'd like to mention that there are some cards for Northeast Animal Steps in the draft, and this is a very enjoyable acting game for younger children, which can also be transformed into charades for older students. And it's a way to really think about some of the creatures who are our neighbors here in the Northeast Forest Lands. The next slide is going to show some toys that the kids make. Here they're using their art skills to create their own nature-centered entertainment. Fun. And I'll show a few slides of some of these toys that actually complement gardening themes. The hummingbirds and grasshopper pets shown are found on the website. And we'll look at the next slide and we'll see some little hummingbirds that play in the garden. The kids have made these. They're not hard to craft, and they're very popular. And you can actually, if we go to the next slide, I think you'll see, yeah, that's what it looks like on the website. You can just get the cutout there for that particular project, and lots of information about it. And there's some photographs that go along. And so it's just a project children usually enjoy playing, and I highly recommend it to you if you want to try it with your kids. Let's see. I think the next slide is going to show us a toss game with flowers and pollinators, and that's based on oh no, that's a drawing project. That we'll look at that one right now. Let's consider that. This is some freehand drawing. The children did all these beautiful drawings on the side here to document how much they had been learning about the way pollinators and flowers have developed these very incredible adaptations and visual signals and structural shapes changes that allow the flowering plants to communicate and work with their particular pollinator partners. And the children learned even more when they admired their classmates' artwork when it was posted in the school's hallways, which serve wonderfully as rotating galleries. So that's some of the artwork that they've done while studying pollination, as well as games. And let's just dance back over to the grasshopper. Let's see. Stacy, can you find those grasshoppers? I think it's slide 26. No, we're going to go the other direction. There's a little boy in a blue shirt and he's holding one. It's right after this one. Here we go. And in this case, as everybody knows, sometimes in our gardens, the animals, in this case, a red-legged grasshopper, they consider our garden plants to be quite tasty. But even so, most years, these grasshoppers aren't a major problem. And in a healthy ecosystem, there are usually plenty of birds, frogs, toads, and carnivorous insects such as spiders and beetles and wasps who will keep those grasshopper numbers in check. And making a rather realistic grasshopper like this to bounce about and take home generates positive associations with these ubiquitous creatures. Overall, with regard to toy making, it's just a pleasant endeavor that builds art skills, even as it reinforces science learning. And the results are very shareable with family and friends, and they can spark good discussions, even as they bolster and support imaginative play. Now, slides 28 to 30, they're going to show us some circle games. The circle games draw on the arts of music, dance, poetry, and drama. There are so many included here in my little activity book that because they're just so archetypal and they're such a powerful form for learning, play, and enjoyment on multiple levels. This next set of three, this slide and the next two show an uncanny experience that happened during an Andy Goldsworthy art project. A group of boys just began dancing around the artwork they had made, which happened to be perfectly illuminated by a ray of sunlight filtering through the forest canopy. This really happened. Children just love to dance. So if you can give them some reasons to dance in your classes, it's a great thing for you and them. So let's look at the seasons games. This is one of the easiest of the circle games in the collection, and that's the next slide. And this circle game combines acting with very simple hand holding to form a ring. Now, some of you who are older like me, you remember when this was part of our education. It was part of our public schools. I think we need to bring this sort of thing back. This little dance formation helps the small ones coordinate their movements in a friendly, inclusive manner as they begin to walk in unison. And now they have the fun of realizing that they've created their own little rotating circle. Physically, visually, psychologically, it helps establish the unity of the group, circle dances can be very effective for social learning and for creating an energizing and supportive atmosphere. The children discover they can help or hinder each other with this. They have the challenge of synchronizing their circling steps, their singing, and their acting. And if each child holds on and does their best, the circle will spin in a delightful way. Circle games inherently demonstrate that everyone's important. They are a gentle, kindly way to begin building executive function skills and help youngsters bond positively with their peers and also with the educational project that their families, teacher, and society care about so deeply. The children trust and respect their families more when school is a positive, friendly, empowering place. Several art projects are available to reinforce the circle of the season's activity, including a season's clock to make, and there are suggested melodies for the season's songs. And the children just act these out. I won't sing these, but each season has its own song and it has the little actions for them to do. And in terms of, if we can just look at the next slide, in terms of the next generation science standards, playing a circle game brings all 7 of the cross-cutting concepts vividly home to the children's attention. Just think about it. There's patterns, cause and effects, scale, proportion and quantity, system and systems models, energy, matter, structure and function, stability and change. These are all the cross-cutting concepts that we experience in a bodily kinesthetic way when we join with others to play in a circle game. Playing such games allows children to understand in their very bones and muscles these otherwise very abstract concepts which are so fundamental to understanding the world that shapes us and which in turn allows us to shape our world. A game like this reminds everyone of the connections between physics and our physical being. So here's the science that goes with the art. Moreover, the circle games can't exist unless the youngsters can cooperate socially. And that can be really hard sometimes for children. So it works best if they can start learning these at an early age. And then they could do the more complicated ones. It is a learned experience to do a circle game well. And when the little circle starts to spin, though, it's a rewarding testament to the group's capacity to work together. The moving circle can be thought of as emblematic of the biological processes of emergence, whereby previously independent organisms cooperate to create entities with new properties and capacities. A circle game represents, in a loose metaphorical way, a microcosm embodying and illustrating what is meant by multi-level evolution and major evolutionary transitions. And another circle game that's fine for little folks is the buzzing bumblebee. And I'll just sing this one real quickly and you can have an idea of how this one works. This is where this one, it's a sweet little game, and it's fun to play when the youngsters are learning about pollination and mutualism. Here comes a roving bumblebee on a fresh May morning. Here comes a roving bumblebee for nectar sweet and pollen. What flower will she choose today? On this fresh May morning, what flower will she choose today? For nectar sweet and pollen, a bluet she will choose today. On this fresh May morning, a bluet she will choose today. For nectar sweet and pollen. So this is a little game. You can just tell there's one child who's the bee. They're moving around a circle of children. They can all be standing still. If the children are able to do this, they can lift if the bee can do this, the children pretend they're little flowers and they lift up their arms and those arms become little arches and the bee weaves his way in and out through that circle of arches. The bee has the option of choosing in this game, and that's a lot of fun, that they actually are going to have not only a solo flight, but then they're going to choose a child, and that child they're going to lead by the hand in and out through all those little arches. And the child who the bee chooses has to name some kind of a flower that's blooming at this time of the year, ideally. But if they're really young, you can just, if they could just name a flower, that's fantastic. And it's a great game for reinforcing the names of plants that have just been learned on a field trip through a meadow, the forest, or your well-planned diversified school garden. So it's a fun little game. And once and that game is explained really well on the website. You can do it as a competitive version. This is especially well received among the more number of obsessed older children. Assuming that the youngsters are going under the arches, you count the number of arches each bee and pollen pair traverse. At the game's end, which pair holds the record for passing through the most arches? And of course, this framing, it diminishes the dance-like quality that can be achieved, but that's just a trade-off. And it's a fun game that I really recommend you try. Another one, the next slide. Oh, here we go. Yeah, well, the Hawk in the Nest, and this is a Farmer in the Dell variant. Both of these slides relate to that particular game. It's a final game at Farmer in the Dell, and it can readily be revised to create ecologically relevant scenarios describing food chains and trophic levels within a particular biome. Even with accurate science content, the enjoyable features of the original game continue to delight even as it instructs. And I think children find it fun to play because it still offers acting, choosing, singing, and circling, as well as opportunities to be the center of attention at times, or just a happy voice in the circling cloud. And in my opinion, it's one of the most effective games I can share. So I really recommend that you look at that game and its lyrics. There's one child who's the hawk, and they have to decide what they're going to eat. And it follows very closely to the format of Farmer in the Dell. But what you actually do is through a series of choices, and the hawk is constantly bringing the food selected into the center of the circle. And then the creature that the hawk has chosen for their lunch, they choose their lunch, and you go right down the line here until finally you come to the sun. And that's the final part of the food chain that you've corrected, and the children get to act like whatever animal they were when they were chosen to become part of the food web, and they're in the center there. And it's just a fun game. The Circling the Sun draft offers some possible variations, highlighting other biomes such as the gator in the swamp, the black bass in the pond, the sea star in the tide pool, and you can create your own on this too. Let's look now at the next slide, some group progress towards a goal, featuring fortune cards and chance. And the ones that I've offered on my website that would be really good for gardening are the Sprouting Seeds and the Foraging Bees Adventures. And there are lots of cards associated with each of these games. It's one of those games where you get a card, and then you're allowed to go forward or backwards depending on whatever the card says. And the card describes some sort of event or situation that a sprouting seed or a foraging bee might encounter during their day. These are a good option. This kind of a group progress towards a goal game. They're a very good option if you're working with children who are having trouble cooperating on a particular day, or you're working with a new, unfamiliar group of students. It holds the youngsters in place for sociable yet competitive interactions, as the destiny cards outlining realistic perils and perks are randomly drawn and read aloud for each team. And as I said, the teams take turns moving towards or away from the goal, and the science learning can take place here even as students play and visit in the fresh air. And I just love these group progress towards the goal games because essentially they're games of chance. So no one feels a sense of personal failure here. They provide for sociability. The teams have varied talents and yet equal opportunities for winning. And so those who are less gifted are never a burden to their team in any way. And you can convey a lot of detailed factual information within the story context that encourages the youngsters to care about the implications of the data, whether they go forwards or back. And playing reinforces key ecological facts in ways that highlight the outcomes. The cards tell the children about both what happens and how it affects the living creatures being considered. For example, children realize more fully that pesticides and herbicides hurt and kill frogs and bees, that mechanical mowing for lawns removes needed habitat for such creatures and many more. The abstract words of science begin to acquire a sort of a hefty meaning, a practical, empathetic weight and value as the children play the game. And you can always expand these games, adding cards to include new information and discoveries about the topic at hand. And then the next one is running. And running is, sometimes our children have high energy levels, and there are times when they just need to run. And when children seriously need to unwind, a race to the garden can be perfect. but to transform it in a little bit, just envelop it with a little bit of imaginative storytelling, relate their running to, say that their race, relate the race to a topic they're studying. So the first one to the garden finish line or the raised bed or whatever the goal is, that is the first apple to ripen, the first monarch to hatch, the first bean to sprout. And if you see on the next slide, we had a certain spot. Let's see. Yeah, we had a certain spot right to our garden where the children who needed to run would just know to line up. And those who didn't want to race, they could be the spectators, the starters, the judges at the finish line. So everyone has work to do. And sometimes we'd have multiple runs before we went to the garden because being a little tired could make it easier for the youngsters to settle down and do focused tasks. And I recommend racing games of various kinds because there's so much evidence that our children need more recess with its options for physical challenges to counterbalance, the sedentary verbal on-screen lessons. I really think we should strive to emulate the Finnish model of 15 minutes of student-directed recess for every 45 minutes of instruction. And I've included a link to a fine article on this topic by April Naumann in the resource document. It recommends also elevating collaboration and trust, not just competition and assessment, as key values in our educational system. Circle games in many arts, including the art of gardening, can help accustom our children to working together, to creating something beautiful and worthwhile that couldn't have existed without their willing contributions to all the other group members. And it can be done outside, and it's a chance for them to get that exercise and fresh air that they need. And it's a chance for them to collaborate, and to collaborate not just for the sake of beating some other group, but for the sake of creating a really wonderful garden. Well, the next, let's see, racing around the circle. I think maybe we'll just, I don't know whether I should speed up or not. Well, we'll just hold that slide right where it is right now. Let me just mention the last Wasp of Autumn. That's a circle game that combines racing with a circle. And it has fortune cards. And this is an activity that offers a chance for some competitive running, even as it encourages youngsters to really learn about the granular details of a bald-faced hornet's life in autumn. And we often have wasps in our garden, and they're just something that they're good to have because they're good predators of the harmful caterpillars and things. So it's important that children learn about them. And this is the kind of game that I would play with my students to help them get over some of their fears that they might have of these creatures and understand their role in their ecosystem. The game is played it's really easy to play. Each child is in the circles given a card representing a danger to a young queen wasp as the summer turns to autumn. And the wasp waits while the teacher names at random one of the dangers from the list. And there's minimal risk of children feeling left out with this game or socially slighted because you select the danger who's going to run from the list. You as a teacher just do that. The child, and you don't know which child it's going to be because you specify the danger. The children have to look at the danger they're holding in their hand. And then if they happen to have the danger card that was called, then they step from the circle. The wasp flies over, stands back to back with them. And at a signal, they both charge around the circle in opposite directions. And the first one to reach the gap is the one who prevails. Playing allows the young people to confront and hopefully move past their unnecessary fears of these important defenders of plants. And, it's just so wonderful that wasps feed their babies on other insects they've captured, some of whom would otherwise eat our gardens. Playing this game allows the students to empathize with the perilous life of this little creature. It offers an energetic race, an attentive audience for the racers, but also the calm order of a static circle. And there's no singing or hand-holding needed, so it works for fourth graders who may be sadly too self-conscious and cool to sing or dance. And then I paired this game about wasp, the circle game with a wasp, with a nice activity with modeling clay. So if we see the next slide, you can see, I love this project. They make very realistic wasp models from maple seeds, samaras, leaf petioles, and modeling clay. And they're easy to make. And the youngsters really learn that there are 3 key parts to an insect's body, that the thorax is a section where all the structures attach for movement, both the wings and the legs. And they can critique and teach each other about the correct placement and proportion scale of the features. And the similarity of the wing of the maple seed and the shape of the real hornet's wings is so astonishing. It epitomizes concepts such as convergent evolution and form following function. And So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. And now we'll go to Burying the Beak. That's another really good singing circle game with a race that is perfect for seed dispersal games. It's a lot of fun, and its chant is long enough that the children actually can begin to feel the exhilaration of dancing in a circle. It features a race between a hungry mouse and a drop seed. It's usually very dramatic and easy to understand. So that's a well-received game I recommend. And then there's Mosquito in the Woods. I can't leave that out. No one who lives in New Hampshire can get by without encountering mosquitoes. And this is a fun game. It has simple lyrics. The children personify and honor the natural predators of mosquitoes. And it's crucial to think that children become aware of the many animals who keep mosquito populations in check. And they have these races in which they race around the circle, and the one who wins, we find out whether the mosquito wins or the mouse does, or whatever creature is involved. This might allow us to if children understand that there are lots of animals and insects like dragonflies out there who keep the numbers down. This could allow us in the future to someday end the massively destructive and ineffective pesticide spray campaigns that are going on against mosquitoes. The toxic chemicals kill so many non-target species, and they disrupt ecosystem functions on so many in so many ways, both on land and in the water. And they also jeopardize human health in the long run. So Mosquito in the Woods is a good game to play about an important creature in our New England forests. And if we go to the tag slide, this is about sociable running, that's running and chasing. And I just need to do a little time check here. We're getting, I don't know, if people have to leave, I certainly would understand. I apologize again for being late starting. But I'll continue unless, Stacy, you think I should stop now. It's getting close to 4:30.
Yeah, I don't know, we can, 10 more minutes.
Sounds good.
Okay.
So are there any questions? Anybody have any questions that really you want to ask or before?
Yeah, just come off the mute and ask a question if you want to.
Okay. All right. Well, let's just go on with the running and chasing tag. Playing tag is a slightly more complicated scenario than a simple run. It's probably very ancient because chasing and catching juvenile peers is one of those games that other playful mammals besides us humans can be observed playing. Our ancestors, human and otherwise, have probably been playing tag for literally tens of millions of years, and the rewarding qualities of this activity appear to be part of our marvelous inherited dispositions for interacting and hunting. So let's make sure free running and tag are part of our children's childhood. Before or after some focused, careful work in the garden, this can be such a satisfying activity for them, and I hope you can add it to your gardening and environmental science toolkit. Here's the best game I know of, the easiest one to add to gardening. And this is the next slide, and it's called Jack Frost and the Crickets. And it's a barely disguised form of freeze tag. You just tell the story of a little elf who was supposed to bring freezing temperatures to the fields and forests in autumn. And in Western European folklore, he not only brought frost, but he also painted the leaves beautiful colors. And you have to provide this description because modern culture has applied the name Jack Frost to all sorts of characters, even a snowman in recent books and films. So unless we conscientiously pass along the old lore, we really have no idea who or what the children are imagining when they play the game. And in this regard, I think we teachers sometimes have to alert our students to the fact that commercial interests often distort famous old legends, and it's important to find trusted sources for historical stories. In any case, the tag crickets can't move. Their muscles are too cold to function. They have to freeze in place until only one cricket is left, and the last cricket to escape is the winner and has the honor of choosing the next Jack Frost. And for a longer and perhaps more fun game, allow one child to serve as the warm sunlight, and that child can tap the frozen crickets, enabling them to hop about some more. And the teacher, a student on the sidelines, can end the game at a good point and select the next Jack Frost. The small class size you see in this photo is because this is a garden club, but this game works really well for larger groups. And I do think we all should advocate for smaller classes. The current industrially scaled mass production model for educating citizens doesn't seem to be working well. I know it exhausted me as a teacher at times. 12 students work really well for my gardening classes, and luckily I was often able to split my classes bigger classes with the computer teacher, so that I was actually able to scale, get to a really human scale for teaching gardening. And I encourage you to look for ways to do that in your schools as well. Most of the games that follow in this collection feature tag, and not only is it beneficial for the youngsters, but in terms of exercise, but it's also the social element of choosing in tag is woven into its structure in a much less obvious and more flexible way as compared to choosing in the circle games. Because selection in a racing tag game is less dependent upon actual friendship or antipathy, sometimes just proximity leads to tagging. Thus, tag games can be especially beneficial for the children who are not as socially connected as some of the others, and it will allow personal agendas, not peer pressure, to better determine the outcomes. Now, slide 40 shows migration with a tag. That's something that is, you're running towards a goal, and then there are dangers or obstacles who stop the group from getting to that goal. I think that's in Project Wild, migration with dangers, but you can really you can make this very appropriate for your very specific situation. You can turn it into a lesson about birds' migrations from South America to the Northeast forest. It creates a really wonderful way to remember how amazingly persistent living beings can be against so many obstacles: bad weather, parasites, sprawling cities, no food. You can brainstorm the game. So a lesson of using this to study hummingbird migration works really well. Make up the games and change the rules when necessary by democratic or consensus decision making. This is another thing I recommend in your gardening classes. Allow the children the autonomy to revise the games when they can see an improvement. Exercise real collaborative skill building. It's an important part of our young people's intellectual development, and it should be part of their school life. And there's a really good version of Tag Towards a Goal that's in Joseph Cornell's book, Sharing Nature with Children. And I've included that, a link to that in the resource sheet that you can access on my website under the special projects. So I highly recommend that. Owls and Crows. It's one of my students' favorite games. And I don't have time to explain it right now, but I recommend it for reviewing academic content. It's just a tremendous, and giving the kids a chance to exercise executive function, skills, muscles, sociability. They just love it. So I highly recommend that as a game that involves racing, tag, and goals. And then running and sorting relays for associative learning are another great set of games that you can play. The relay race is just splendid for so many reasons. You can vary the length of the run based on the energy level of your students. I've had good luck with relays even in the midst of winter by employing a school hallway. You do have to plan ahead a little bit to create a few material props for this, but I found it so worthwhile. And I remember learning about this strategy many years ago at a workshop being taught by distinguished New Hampshire environmental educator Ruth Smith. And there are a number of sorting games in this collection, and you can invent all kinds of other ones. So among the kinds of relays that have worked well for my gardening programs, I like to show you slide 41, a materials mat that we created. And these you make these for the materials you have in your particular setting. And slide 42 will show you a little basket with some true and false pages that you can use, and you can just glue those onto a poster board, heavier poster board or mat board, and those are available on my website. You can download all this stuff for free. It's nice to have something pretty for them as a destination for them to head towards. True false sorting is excellent. They are a great way for children. When you do this as a relay, it's a great way for the children to learn that all kinds of abilities are vital on a team. And I think you all know how that works. The good student, for once, who sometimes might be shunned or teased in part because they are a good student, they're suddenly a valuable asset to the team. The athlete who can run like the wind but hasn't been paying attention, forgive the stereotypes, he'd be an outstanding contributor to the success of the team. So relay races, sorting, science based on science concepts you're trying to get across. They're a tremendous tool for test preparation for older students, and they're a help at all ages in terms of class morale, focus, content learning, and probably health. And they're also excellent for relatively simple concepts like seasons, plant or animals, or even more complex topics like winter strategies. And I think you'll see the next slide shows a sorting game that we played a lot in the autumn and early winter autumn adaptations. Running and collecting is another great type of game. And so on slide 44, you'll see some team collecting. This is great even for the youngest. You just scatter the materials, you ask them to run out and collect, say, one giant acorn, and then return to base, and that could be to their caregiver in a parent-child class. You provide lots of approval, acclaim for their work, and their acceptance and completion of the task. With older children, you just can put out lots and lots of tokens, and there's minimal social pressure, especially if you do have abundant tokens. Who can gather the most? It's a simple challenge. It's easily understood. Crafting the tokens can be a pleasant classroom or picnic table activity. And the tokens can just be as ephemeral as cupcake liners or squares of colorful colors, construction paper if you don't have much time. And they, let's see, project, I think it's slide 45, the children are pretending to be various animals and they're collecting some kind of a what's the word for it? So they're collecting some kind of little token and they're going to see who gets the most. And like, you be very specific. So if you're doing rabbits, they might be collecting little green cupcakes holders that represent clovers, or they could be the blue jays collecting acorns. So do put some science into this whole process, but do allow them to run too. And they even enjoy having the food, distributing the food across the playing field. Someone child will pretend to be the spirit of autumn bounty or some other imaginary being, and they'll scatter the seeds for the waiting but very hungry creatures. And one of the things about this kind of collecting game is there are going to be some who can't run, and they can be the referees and they can give the start signal. And slide 46 just sort of highlights that while the games are going on, sometimes there are some really good little side conversations happening. And there's just, you can play the games individually, or you can play them in teams, and then you can turn the teams into flocks of birds or flocks of, or families of mammals. So anyway, there are lots of variations, and I recommend this one. Running and collecting with a linked run is something a little different and amps up the challenge a bit. In this one, they are actually working. This is a little hard to describe, so I just am going to recommend that you try to look at this on the website if it interests you at all. If we go to the next slide, you'll see the collecting cards. You cut these out; they're basically 4, and you hand those out to the each child, and they become whatever they get. So they're going to be either carbon dioxide, sun, water, or a seed in good soil. And they have to find 3 other children who represent the other major inputs. When they find them, they link hands, and then they run towards the finish line. And notice we're deliberately trying to advance truthfulness in this particular game, not especially in our science teaching, as we give to our youngsters. I think there's no justification really for not using scientifically accurate language to describe photosynthesis. And please excuse me, but I think we need to forget about saying air as an ingredient in photosynthesis. The children are developmentally brilliant at assimilating new words. And so we're literally dumbing them down if we don't offer them real science with accurate terminology when they're young. Our future citizens mustn't be kept ignorant of fundamental life processes like the beautiful chemistry of photosynthesis. Sadly, this is what happens when our science textbooks use inaccurate language to describe how plants make their food. And everyone in a day of rising greenhouse gas levels, particularly carbon dioxide, need to know that plants take in that carbon dioxide and they use it to link sun's energy and water into carbohydrates, sugars and starches again, not air, which is the word that's usually supplied. Also, when talking about habitat needs for the seeds, I like to emphasize good soil with its enormous population of healthy little microbes, instead of the extraordinarily abstract and vague concept of space, which can make people start to think about crowding and all these things. Certainly seeds sometimes sprout on a branch or in people's hydroponic in the hydroponic situations, but at least using the word good soil acknowledges the general situation and makes room for thinking about the essential value of our precious outer layer of the earth. its delicate living skin, good soil, and a seed's venerable genetic heritage need to be showcased. And so these little cards that the kids have to get and that they have to run with, they help the children learn about these things. I think we need to stress the antiquity and continuity of the genetic line that's contained in the seeds. It's an important thing for our youngsters to know. And that being said, the linked run is really incredibly popular. The children love to take hands, and once they get all the components they need together, they take hands and they race off. And they have to reach the other side, the goal, without breaking the chain. And this is a difficult task for the groups. Not surprisingly, there's a tremendous amount of physical and social learning and attunement required to get from one side of the playing field to the other in a linked run, and the students respond to signals from straining classmates. They practice active compassion towards those partners who have trouble keeping up or hanging on, and much has to be processed and responded to at the teams to reach the finish line, which symbolizes a happy photosynthesizing plant. And now I'm looking at the time here. Let's see. I don't want to keep you too long. There are many other games that I love, and collecting, running, and tag, those are especially good. Why don't we just go towards the end to this, but we won't have time for it. So we'll just slip up to go forward to slide 51. And I just like to conclude that real games and I'm just going to read from one of the little articles that I had published in the magazine I mentioned to you earlier. Real games and the re-enchantment of education. And I truly believe that if we can reinvest beloved old ontologically appropriate forms of play like collecting and chasing described here with new truths, we can improve the quality, integrity, and breadth of our students' learning experiences in the gardens and beyond. We can help counter some of the pernicious effects of sedentary, verbally saturated styles of education and commercially driven electronic entertainment and culturation. Enjoyable team games where individuals run, hop, jump, etc. with their friends to collect cards or objects or sort. These are real processes that can help make learning more physically and emotionally engaging. Indeed, education becomes more humanistic, self-directed, and less aversive when we respect children's affective and motor propensities, as well as their intellectual curiosity about the world in which they find themselves. Such games can be readily adapted to add genuine exercise, social bonding, expressive decision-making, and fast, time-sensitive executive function cognitive skills to so many different kinds of learning challenges. And the last slide, I just want to thank you, teachers. Indeed, I really grateful for what you're doing. And I think we've come to a time in history now when we need to move beyond teaching methods that were shaped by narrowly rational, excessively competitive, alienating, industrial-style models of society and socialization. Shouldn't we now be accustoming our children to learning and working together joyfully, respectfully, and creatively with and within nature? I think that we should, and I'm so grateful that you all who are here on this webinar are the kinds of teachers who are doing that. And so that you're making a huge contribution. And these, if we can get results like the ones I just mentioned, these results will be good, not just for us humans, but for all the other creatures on this lovely blue planet, beings whose relationships and harmonies undergird our presence here, making our lives both possible and pleasant. And I just want to wish you all the best with your gardening endeavors. Thank you again.
Thank you, Edith. That was a lot of wonderful information from a very passionate teacher. So, and again, Evolving Beauty, you can find, I think, everything that she presented today, and she's sharing it for free. So I hope you'll go there. And if anybody has any questions, we'll take one or two.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stacy, for making this possible. Your patience.
If no questions, so this has been recorded and it will be available on the New Hampshire Farm to School website, as well as NewHampshireSchoolGardens.org. And I hope you visit Edith's website, evolvingbeauty.org. So thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. And thank you so much, Edith, for passing along your passion and knowledge of all of those years that you were teaching.
Well, much gratitude to you and everyone here. Thanks.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Have a good evening.